All right, let's do the chemistry for the blood auger plates. So you'll have already seen the PowerPoint lab lecture on blood auger. Remember that it is an enrichment media because it's enriched with red blood cells, live red blood cells. And it's also a differential media in that you can differentiate the type of hemolysis which is displayed. Hemolysis is the act of digesting or lysing the red blood cells. And that's based on the type of hemolysins or hemolysins. It's the same word, just pronounced differently, which are the enzymes responsible for the hemolysis, which is the lysing of the red blood cells. So it can differentiate between alpha, beta, and gamma hemolysis based on the hemolysins that the enzymes, those are the enzymes that are in the bacteria to display the different type of hemolysis. So the chemistry is pretty easy. This is the same sheet that we were working on before. So the substrate in the blood auger is the blood, or RBCs, red blood cells. The enzymes responsible are the hemolysins or hemolysins. I usually say hemolysins. Remember, hemolysins is SINS. Hemolysis, the act of, is just SIS. So if you're, depending on the type of hemolysins your bacteria has, it'll break up the red blood cells and show the lysing of the red blood cells, or lysed red blood cells. And the indicator there is the alpha, beta, or gamma hemolysis. Okay. Usually there's a handout that we go through with this lab, if you will. We would have swabbed our own throats, and we would have gone deep into our throats as if you were getting swabbed for a strep test or something. So those of you that have gotten a strep test before, you know how deep they have to go, and it's pretty uncomfortable to do it. But we were going to try to, we were going to grow our own throat bacteria. And depending on what kind of bacteria you naturally harbor in your throat, we would have seen either alpha, beta, or gamma hemolysis. Probably a combination of two of those three, maybe. So in a class of 20 or so, usually we have most people that have alpha hemolytic bacteria in their throats. And there's different types of group of strep that live in our throats that are just naturally there. They're not causing any infection. They're not causing any disease. They're just normal flora for us. Alpha hemolytic bacteria can cause infection, not necessarily always in the throat. They can move from place to place. And they are usually in the throats of most people, but some people also naturally carry beta hemolytic bacteria in their throats. And beta hemolytic bacteria are the ones that can do the complete lysing or digestion of the red blood cells. And those could also cause different kinds of infection. And sometimes that infection could lead to strep throat. So the type of bacteria that causes strep throat. Sorry, I'm trying to plug in my computer so I can show you the handout that I was probably going to post, but I'm not going to post it because I don't want to confuse you all. But the type of bacteria that can usually cause strep throat is called Strep pyogenes. Let me write this down so you guys know this. I don't think I have that handout with me, but it's called Strep pyogenes. Do you have to know this? I'm going to say, yeah, you should know this. Streptococcus pyogenes is the one that causes strep throat. There's no other strep bacteria that causes strep throat except Strep pyogenes. Hold on, let me log into my computer here. If I can remember my password. Okay, oops, nope, I can't remember my password. There we go. So, excuse me, Strep pyogenes causes strep throat. There are a whole host of other kind of strep bacteria that can live in your throat. And most of you are going to have likely a other kinds of strep in your throat. So I'm going to look at my computer here. I'm sorry, this kind of is super low key and sucks, and I probably wasn't super prepared. But what we would have done is we would have gone over this handout, and most of you would have been in either Group A, Group B, Group C, Group D, or the other Group D, strep, because that's what we would have seen growing in your throat. And then some of you probably would have had beta hemolytic bacteria growing in your throat, which means it could have belonged to Group A, Group B, Group C, Group D, and that's it. And if it was beta hemolytic, it's possible it could have been this Strep pyogenes here, but it could have been some other kind of strep as well. So we would have gone through this handout and I would have talked to you about some things, but there's only one major thing that you need to know. First was that Strep pyogenes is the bacteria responsible for strep throat. And one major thing that you should know in general in life, you should know this, but you should know this for the lab practical as well. It says everything that I have starred and kind of circled around there. It should be added that if streptococcal URIs, which is a upper respiratory infection, are improperly treated, serious sequelae. A sequelae is like a secondary infection. So you get the first infection, your body is immunocompromised, and then you can get a secondary sequelae or infection as a result. So if you have an improperly treated URI that is caused by strep, specifically strep pyogenes. So let's say you have a strep throat and you don't go get it taken care of and you don't take all your antibiotics, you can get a serious secondary infection or sequelae. And that includes pneumonia, acute endocarditis, rheumatic fever, and glomerulonephritis. So let me write those down so you can see them. So you can get pneumonia. You can get endocarditis, which is an infection of the heart and heart sac. You can get rheumatic fever. And glomerulonephritis. So super, super important that if you think you have a strep infection, that you get it checked out, that you get that throat swab. And then if it turns out that you do have strep, that you get it taken care of, because you can get a whole host of these other secondary infections that could kill you or cause you to be, even more immunocompromised. So I had a student several years ago that would just get strep throat all the time, and she was having some pretty major issues, and they could not figure out what was going on. And it turns out that they were pretty sure that she had rheumatic fever and this was in the spring. So she was pretty sick at the beginning of the semester, kept getting strep throat, could not get it taken care of. No amount of antibiotics was clearing it up. And she kept having like higher than normal fevers. Her face would break out in these big rashes and her body would have these red rashes. And by spring break, I think she came back and she said that they were pretty sure she had rheumatic fever. And it wasn't like she wasn't taking the antibiotics. It's just they weren't really working, and it was causing this rheumatic fever as a result of it. And then I have a friend of a friend who was in the Peace Corps, and she was in a remote village in Africa. And she got strep throat, and she was pretty sure it was strep throat because she had had it before, but there were no doctors to speak of. She couldn't go get antibiotics, and so it just kind of had to clear on its own. She ended up with glomerulonephritis. This is an infection of the kidneys, of the glomerulus and the nephritis. The nephrons in the kidneys. And by the time she got back to the States, that's what she had to deal with, was this infection that was making her life pretty miserable. So it is really, really important to get these strep infections taken care of should you be a person that ends up with strep more often than not. So this blood auger lab would have been to talk about the hemolysins, the enzymes responsible for lysing red blood cells. And then we would have discussed alpha, beta, and gamma, the difference between the three. So you need to be able to know the difference between the three type of hemolysis. So again, alpha hemolysis shows you a yellowing. So what ends up happening is that the red blood cells kind of partially digest, the bacteria kind of partially digest the red blood cells, and you get a little bit of a yellowing color in the media. And then with beta hemolysis, you get a complete clear zone around where the bacteria is growing because it has fully digested the red blood cells. And then gamma doesn't show any lysing. There's no digestion of the red blood cells. So the plate stays nice and red like it was originally. I don't think I've ever had a class where we see anyone with gamma hemolysis on their plates, but often we see both alpha, mostly alpha in people's throats, and beta hemolysis in people's throats. So this year, when I was sick earlier in the semester, and I was pretty sure I didn't have strep throat, but I was getting those white spots in my throat. I had one plate of blood agar left from the previous semester, and I swabbed my throat to see if I was going to get this beta hemolysis. And if I did, I was pretty sure I was going to have that I had strep throat and I was going to go to the doctor. But my throat swab was alpha hemolytic like it always is, so I didn't worry about it being strep throat. I knew it was probably some other kind of infection that I had. So no worries there. So back in the day when you got a strep test, you used to have to wait at least 24 hours so they can grow it on blood agar and they could see if it had alpha or beta hemolytic properties. Now they can run the test in, I think, 10 or 15 minutes, which is really nice to get that quick turnaround so you can start the antibiotic regimen pretty soon. So for this blood agar, again, you've got to know the difference between alpha, beta, and gamma hemolysis. You need to know the chemistry behind it. You also need to know that Strep pyogenes is the bacteria implicated in strep throat. And if you don't get strep throat taken care of, these are the 4 secondary sequelae or infections that you can get as a result of an untreated or improperly treated strep infection. Well, I hope you guys have a good day. It's Good Friday. Have a happy and blessed Good Friday. And we will communicate more as the days go by.